World War I was famously called the war to end all wars. This was because a worldwide conflict with a loss of life never before seen in history was both a catastrophe and a historical spectacle that revolutionized the art of war and shook the foundations of the world to its very core. Then, of course, they did it again in World War II. But what fascinates me about World War I in specific was it was the first war of its kind in the modern age, particularly so when you take into account new inventions like the Gatling gun, the aeroplane, and primitive tanks, as well as remarkable strategies that would be used in both this war and the war to precede it. Not to mention, politically, it had one of the most large impacts that we had ever seen at the time. And once again, I remind you that it just got even worse and worse with the Second World War. This war, however, which we call the Final War, had large implications as well, but all wars prior usually ended in one major nation or government humiliated and destroyed. This war resulted in the destruction and decimation of all of them. To put it in the simplest of terms, no country won because all countries were destroyed. Tragically, the fallout of this war made the planet fertile for power vacuums, anarchy, death, and the formation of new countries with more radical political doctrine than their predecessors. But you will hear more of them soon. For now, here's the most basic recap of the war and its consequences. Zenith officially declares war on the remaining countries in late 2124, dividing the world into two factions: the globalist powers who wished to maintain supremacy over the world, and the nationalist powers who wanted to reinstate the proud nations they once called home. The war started with difficulty and civil unrest within Zenith, with millions of Smite supporters who rioted their cities in protest in both the war and the autocratic government, weakening morale within Zenith. The nationalists moved quickly and made significant gains from 2124 to 2125 in Central America, New Zealand, and Alaska. Alaska, of course, being a given because Zenith-controlled bases there were poorly guarded and overtaken within days by the nationalists, who then used these bases to distribute weapons, supplies, and missiles. Humiliated by the first year of the war, the GEC sent nuclear arms on November 4th, 2126, to several territories of contention, surprisingly, all of which were their own. They would rather eliminate these chunks of land instead of surrendering them to the nationalists in Smite. Gone within days were southeastern Canada, Florida, the original home of Smite, the Philippines, and all of Chile, becoming radioactive wastelands. All according to plan, it caused major confusion among the nationalist powers, and fear among their forces. It just didn't make any sense. May I remind you once again that it's easy to forget that any war waged on foot, with armies, tanks, and jets, can be easily undone with a high-ranking military officer, within minutes of convincing his government to blow them to hell. However, giving up their liberty was not an option for the nationalists, and to the globalists, victory had to be achieved at all costs. And this reigned especially true of the Christmas incident. It's December 24th, 2127. And all powers have ceased attack on one another to celebrate the holidays, as usual. But within Zenith's government, many officials argued that there are no more holidays to celebrate. Christmas shouldn't exist as they know it because, to them, there is no God, and by extension, no Christ. And with that said, why should they give their enemies even a moment of rest? Fiends threaten world peace and are in the way of progress. So the GEC, collectively, decided to send their friends a Christmas gift. At 1 a.m. Christmas Day, 2127, Zenith launched 70 nuclear arms on key areas of Smite Command. Stations, battlefronts, and many civilian cities went up in flame and toxic waste, being reduced to ash and rubble. Many people within Zenith, as well as their nationalist enemies, cried out and condemned the GEC for a supposed war crime, all to be silenced as the GEC publicly announced they themselves would decide what is legal and what is not, and would finish the war very soon. After this event, in January 9th, 2128, the leading representatives of the Smite Foundation have convinced the independent countries to engage in nuclear war. The time is now. It has come down to if we must. And now, for a lack of better terms, we simply must, says leading nuclear research developer Warwick Kramer to the Congress of the West, the wartime government of all allied nationalist countries. Despite the many objections and much panic, this proposal was unanimously approved. The plan was to bomb Denmark, the heart of Zenith. This would be accomplished by striking from orbit from the Reverence a Smite-engineered space station with a dexterous ability to fire nuclear arms from space, the very capital of their oppressors. The problem is, there was practically nothing the GEC was not already expecting. The nationalist powers decided to risk it all in the highest stakes game of poker the world has ever seen, quite literally gambling with their lives. Smite had almost all major forces and key battlegrounds withdrawn, causing the globalist forces to disperse. Troops and other forms of protection were drawn from the capital, making Europe an easier target. In March 22nd of that year, the GEC publicly proclaimed they had reached a turning point. However, they had been fooled, as forces were withdrawn from the capital defense in a large-scale swoop to eliminate remnants of the nationalists and their Smite partisans. The independent nations sent their silver bullet to the heart of Zenith. April 31st, 2128, Little Jefferson, a modified atomic bomb with the capacity to annihilate entire continents, was launched from the Reverence space station. Within 2 hours, it hit Denmark, and a crater that could be seen from space was left in its wake. Millions were gone in the blink of an eye. The cries of the few corrupt and the many innocent were heard around the world, and suddenly silenced within an instant. The GEC spent their final moments attempting to escape, some accepting their fate. Smite and the nationalists believed they had won, but a contingency was set in place by the late GEC and already set in motion. If they couldn't have the world, no one could. 3 months after the fall of Denmark, and with Zenith in shambles, those in Zenith High Command activated the Artemis Initiative. All missiles, bombs, and nukes in Zenith's possession were rerouted and launched at random, hitting several key countries and sending them into a nuclear winter. It is not to say that no one survived when the bombs fell, but no government or nation survived, and the world fell into complete chaos and anarchy. This is July 3rd, 2128, the end of civilization.